So this is by far the longest chapter in the book and also by far the most complex. But we will break it down into very simple sub chapters and we'll discuss each one in great detail. Then you will find that this is not that hard after all, because in a certain sense this combines everything that we have learned up till now. It combines pipelines, as you will see, it combines caches, it combines the on-chip network, and it also requires a certain amount of knowledge in basic data structures, namely graph algorithms. So that is required. So particularly when there are cycles in graphs, and also the topological sort algorithm. This is something that students need to know, right? So topological sort, existence of cycles in a graph. These are the two basic concepts that students are expected to know. And this chapter heavily builds on chapters 7 and 8. So even if somebody hasn't gone through chapter 8, but whatever is required, pointers will be supplied at the right points within the chapter. So this is how we will proceed. The first is that an overview of parallel programming will be provided. So most of us have written sequential programs throughout our life. We have not written a parallel program. But this entire chapter is about building hardware for parallel programs. The next is a fairly large number of slides on theoretical foundations. This is very important because this lays the base for pretty much the entire chapter. Then we will discuss cache coherence and memory models. So if somebody has understood this, then understanding these two is going to be very easy. And finally, we will discuss data races with a very important theorem that we will cover over here, which is very important for the correctness of the entire system. So if somebody has covered all of these, I would say that they know almost enough to successfully survive and thrive as a multi-core engineer. The last module, which is on transaction memory, is strictly optional. So if somebody doesn't have enough time, he or she may not cover this. Even though covering it is not uh, discouraged, in the sense if they have enough time, they can look at transactional memory. So first, let us motivate the need for multi-core systems. So what I'm showing you is some open source data where the x-axis is the date. So it starts from 1999 to 2012. And the y-axis is essentially the performance of processors. The performance represented in the y-axis is represented in terms of the SPECint 2006 score. So the SPECint, these are a set of standard benchmarks distributed by SPEC, the Performance Evaluation Cooperative. So a SPECint score is provided, where the SPECint score is essentially it is the ratio of execution time on a given machine with respect to a machine in the past. So these are relative numbers, so let's not go into the units of the y-axis, consider them to be arbitrary units. But the most important point to note is that we are seeing a gradual saturation in single core performance, and this gradual saturation after 2010 or so. So I didn't plot, so see, each one of these points actually represents a distinct processor, okay, distinct CPU. So I could have plotted more data, but the results would have been the same, that single core performance by and large has remained constant. It has not changed. It does tend to increase a little bit, primarily because we are able to pack in more cache because the transistors are getting smaller. But just because transistors get smaller, it doesn't really mean that the efficiency is also increasing commensurately. The reason being that there is something called a design rule in a VLSI fabrication process. So a design rule basically specifies the rules for placing, let's say, two transistors or two logic gates side by side. So what is really happening with design rules is that they are getting more restrictive, in the sense that it is not really possible to arbitrarily place different kinds of transistors and different kinds of structures that use transistors beside each other. Because of that, there is a sublinear increase in performance. So there is a certain amount of saturation. So as we can see, single core performance has saturated in this time frame. After 2008, you can clearly see the signs of saturation. So basically, the idea is that instead of a single core, take a large problem, divide it into smaller problems, and have multiple cores to collaboratively solve a task. So what we do is we take a big problem, divide it into several smaller problems, and assign each problem to a separate core. So each problem is essentially assigned first to a thread. So a thread is a lightweight process. So I'll tell you the difference between a process and a thread. That's a very important distinction to make at this level. So a process is essentially a running instance of a program. All right. So when you take a program, like let's say if you take PowerPoint, so PowerPoint as such is a data file, right, which is residing in the file system. But when I double click it, it becomes a program, a running program. So a running program, instance of a running program is a process. So a process clearly has its virtual memory and open files, network connections, all of that. A thread is essentially what is called a lightweight process, in the sense it's a process in its own right, but we also define a set of sister threads, each thread being a process in its own right, but the threads do share a large part of the virtual address space. Namely, they have their separate stacks and registers. That is their private, but other than this private storage, they do share the heap region where all the dynamically allocated arrays go. They do share the code. So different threads can communicate by reading and writing to shared memory because they share, as I said, large parts of the virtual address space. So that is important, that these are not really unrelated processes, but instead each of these threads can communicate with each other. So you can say that they together form a whole. So Linux defines something called a thread group, where instead of one process I create a thread group with multiple threads. The threads do share, as I said, part of the virtual memory space between them. So what is private to a thread is actually its stack, and of course it's a set of registers and so on, but pretty much that's it. So each sub problem is mapped to first a thread in the software space and then to a core. So let me delete the ink on this slide. It will be clearly visible to you that each sub problem is mapped to a separate thread, and that thread is mapped to a core. So each of these blue boxes over here are essentially cores. So let us consider an example. It's a working example. You will find the details in the book along with the code. So I will not explain the exact parallel programming semantics. That is not the aim of the book. So the aim of the book is to introduce two paradigms to you. One is a shared memory paradigm, other is a message passing paradigm. So we will again take some liberty with the syntax. So the syntax will not be exact, but let's put it this way, it will be similar. So what is the problem? We take an array numbers, which is a very, very large array. It can contain a billion elements, right? So it contains size elements, and it's an array, it's a very large array. It contains size elements, okay? So the aim is to compute the sum of all of its elements, all right? That's the aim. So let's not worry about overflows. So let's assume that the entire sum does not overflow. So let's compute the sum of all the elements. So the way that this is done is that it is done by distributing the work among the n threads. So let us distribute them equally. So we divide the array into n parts. We assign each part to a code. So what do? We take a large array. We break it down into, let's say, part 1, part 2, part n. Each of these parts is assigned to a core, alright. So we compute the partial sum, which is the sum of each part. Alright. And then we add the partial sums. Alright. So each thread computes the sum of each part. So if there are n threads, we end up with n partial sums. Then we add the partial sums. So this first operation of actually dividing a large problem into smaller sub-problems, the way we have partitioned this array is known as the map step. And then each map step produces, each step, right? Each step over here produces a partial sum, and the partial sums are added. And this process of addition of the partial sums is known as the reduce step. So you must have heard of the popular programming paradigm called MapReduce. So MapReduce is basically this. So let us now look at the first programming paradigm, which is shared memory based paradigm. So in this case, we have n cores and they communicate via shared memory. So the way they communicate is that, let's say there is the same variable. So variable x is, let's say, assigned 5 over here. Then we read the variable x into a register and it will automatically get the value 5, subject to the fact that it is being read later. So this will of course be a topic of intense discussion. When is something written, when is something read, but for the time being, let's assume that all of these things happen the way that we would expect in an intuitive manner. What is intuitive or not, we have 50 slides to explain that. So each core runs a thread, different threads share parts of the virtual memory space, and the main communication happens via reading and writing to shared variables. So these shared variables are variables that are not declared on the stack. So they are typically declared on the heap. So they are essentially, let's put it this way, variables that have a global scope, that do not have a function scope, but that have a, broadly speaking, global scope, right? Global to at least the piece of code that the threads are running. So when we see an example, it will become clear. So let us look at the code. So this code is the OpenMP code. So I'm not showing all of it, but I'm showing the relevant parts of it. So OpenMP is basically an extension to C++. Almost all C++ compilers support OpenMP. So if you write it in OpenMP, which is just a small addition on top of it, they will compile it to parallel code automatically. You don't have to do anything. So let's see. So given we have n threads, so which let's say are defined as hash defined constants. So we have an array of partial sums where each entry stores a partial sum. Int numbers with size entries is the big long array whose sum we want to compute. And the final sum will be stored in this variable result. Alright. So the final sum of adding up all the elements is going to be stored over here. So the parallel section, this is how it's going to look. We will define our OpenMP directive hash pragma OMP. So hash OMP for OpenMP and parallel. So this indicates that whatever is there inside the left curly bracket and the right curly bracket, which is essentially all of this piece of code, this piece of code will execute in parallel. So if we have n threads, then n copies of this code will be made and they'll be dispatched to each of the threads, which will run on its separate core. So we can always have less cores than n, but then a core will have to run multiple threads, right, in a multitasked time shared kind of manner. So the first is get my processor ID. Let's say that is a get my core ID. So int my ID is OMP get thread num. This is an OpenMP statement which gets the thread number, right? It gets the number of the thread, whether it's 3 or 5 or 7. It just gets the number of the thread, int my ID. It adds a portion of the numbers So what is my portion? Well, my portion starts from my ID. So core 0 gets 0, core 1 gets 1, core 2 gets 2, and so on. So I find the starting and ending index of my portion of my array, which is essentially my ID into size by n, and end index is start index plus size by n. So all that I have is that I have a simple for loop that simply iterates through this portion of the array and then adds up all the numbers and stores them in partial sums my ID. Of course, here the implicit assumption is that the entire partial sum, each of these entries in partial sums, each entry is initialized to 0. That is the assumption. So after making that assumption, all that I do is I add up all the numbers for my part of the array. So each thread does that. So considering a large array, if let's say it's broken into n parts, so thread 1, so let's count from 0. Thread 0 would add everything in this chunk. Thread 1 would count everything from this. 2 would count everything from this, and so on and so forth. So now all of their partial sums are stored in the array partial sums. Subsequently, the parallel section completes, right? So this was the lion's share of the work, where the large problem was divided into small problems. So this part completes now. Then the sequential section begins. In the sequential section, all that we do is that a single thread, which would be the thread that initiated this parallel processing, so the control returns back to it. It iterates from 0 to L and simply adds up all the partial sums and stores them in the variable result, which as you can see was initialized to 0. So this completes our processing. So as you can see, the primary feature over here is we have a parallel section and then we have a sequential section after that. The map portion of the work is done in the parallel section. And we are using two OpenMP directives here, hash pragma OMP parallel, to run a piece of code, copies of a piece of code on each core. And furthermore, we have a get processor ID, which is essentially get core ID, which gets the number of so it's actually, well, I should be more accurate over here. It's actually get thread ID. And as I said, we can have many more threads and number of cores, and what we really care about are threads. So this gets the thread number, and the threads are numbered 0 to n minus 1. So from the thread number, we can find out the starting and ending index of the portion of the array assigned to, let's say, thread I. Then all that we do is compute the partial sum for thread I. The same happens for the rest of the threads, and then we add the partial sums. So here the simple directive is doing much more than what you think it is doing, and it is handling the entire code of creating the threads, setting their state, and dispatching the code to them. And the get thread num is very simple, because even if let's say n copies of the same code are made, they will still return different values for this function, and the values will range from 0 to n minus 1. Alright, so given that we have seen this, let's see a quick visualization of what just happened. So we had a parent thread, we initialized the parent thread, then we spawned a set of child threads. So set of child threads all did the job of taking a portion of the array and adding it, portion of the array and adding all the elements. Then they wrote their values to the partial sums array. There was a thread join operation where all of these threads kind of terminated and joined the main thread. The main thread subsequently began. There was a sequential section where all the partial sums were added and the variable result was finally computed. Now let's look at another paradigm, so which is not really used in multi-core systems. It is used in multi-processor systems, where the multiple processors are connected over a network. So here the idea is that the cores communicate by sending messages to each other. So we can say that maybe one processor is over here, then they are connected to the other one via Ethernet, and so there can be a complex network of processors, processing nodes rather, and the network cards. So the connection will happen on the basis of sending messages. So the messages are sent to the IP addresses. The standard network-based communication, the way it happens on the internet, that one processor will send a message to another, and they can be connected with any arbitrary topology, it doesn't matter. But the messages are pretty much sent using the standard networking TCP/IP networking protocols. The memory is not shared. So as I said, all communication is by sending and receiving messages. There are two very basic functions that MPI is essentially a message passing interface that MPI supports. So I don't claim to be explaining MPI per se in great detail, and the program that is shown is also it is like MPI, but it's not MPI with the exact syntax. So one function can be send PID comma val, where I send an integer val to process with ID PID. So it can be processed with ID PID, or it can be, so this is an MPI process. So the MPI process will be mapped to some machine and some IP address, but let's for the time being forget about that. Receive PID is receive an integer in this case from process with ID PID. This is a blocking call, which means until we don't receive, we just wait, we don't do anything else. If the PID is equal to any source, then it means that as long as someone sends a message, even if someone sends a message, the receive function will return with the value sent by that process. So we don't want a message from a given process, any process will do. So given that the message passing code, which looks like MPI but it's not MPI, is like this. We start all the parallel processes. So we have this directive over here, spawn all parallel processes. So what this directive does is that if let's say we have configured it, so I'm not showing that code. If we have configured n processes, then pretty much over the machines on a network, it will initiate those n processes. For each process, execute the following code. Int my ID is equal to get my process ID. So we had get thread num in MPIs. In this case, we get a process ID, which will again return the same thing, an integer between 0 and n minus 1. We compute all the partial sums. So this code for computing the partial sums are exactly identical with one difference. We don't have an array. So in the other case, we used an array because we shared memory. In this case, we don't. So in this case, we don't share the virtual or physical address space. So what we do is that we definitely don't share the virtual address space. The physical address space we may share if multiple processes are running on the same machine, but that's irrelevant. So the partial sum here is initialized to 0. We add a portion of the array and we store the sum to the local variable partial sum. So one of these processes we designate it to be the main process or the root process. So let that process have a process ID of 0, and let the rest of the processes have an ID which is between 1 and n minus 1. So if it's a non-root process, meaning the my ID field is not 0, then we send the partial sum to the root. So we invoke the send function, send it to process 0, which is the root, and what do we send? We send the partial sum. So the map process ends here. Now for the root, we have int sum is equal to partial sum. So we initialize the sum value with what the partial sum the root has computed. Then for the rest of the processes, we run this for loop. As long as we receive a message from any source, we add the integer to sum, and given the fact that we know how many messages we'll receive, which are n minus 1 messages, we just run this loop for n minus 1 times. Alright. And after running it for n minus 1 times, we will get all the messages, we'll add them up. Then a little bit of cleanup is required, little bit of bookkeeping, all the processes will be shut down and the sum variable will be returned back to the caller. So here clearly there has been no only transfer of messages, right? Only messages have been transferred without having a shared virtual address space. So this is clearly slower but more scalable. So as compared to shared memory, this is undoubtedly more slower because of the overhead of sending messages. But clearly it is more scalable. So a shared memory maybe will not scale more than 200 nodes, 200 cores, right, where each core is running a thread. But message passing can scale to thousands or hundreds of thousands of nodes, right? So basically this thing is you can say made to scale, right? It's slower but more scalable. All right. Okay. So now let's keep going. So the summary is shared memory, of course, is easy to program, not scalable, and the code is portable across machines. So across different machines, we just initialize the threads. The threads are scheduled on the course using a scheduler, a scheduler in American English. And it's kind of portable code in the sense that code that runs on one machine will run on another. MPI is also portable because it's a standard, but nevertheless it's hard to program. If we are relying on hardwired IP addresses, then of course the code is not portable at all. But in many cases, so the MPI interface nicely abstracts all of that. In that case, the portability is much more, and clearly scalability is there in the sense that message passing is always more scalable. But it is not really the method of choice for what we are interested in, which is a multi-core system. For a multi-processor system like a data center level supercomputer, message passing is great, but not for what we need. So we will primarily focus on shared memory. So to focus on shared memory, we will not be able to move much further unless we do a little bit of math. So this mathematics is embodied in the Amdahl's law. The Amdahl's law predicts that if we increase the number of processors, what will the scalability of the system look like? All right. So the question is, how much is it that we can parallelize? That is what the Amdahl's law predicts. So we are limited by the fraction of the sequential section, which is fsec, because as we have discussed, a parallel program in particular, has two sections. It has a sequential section where a single thread runs, and we have a parallel section where the multiple threads run. So the Amdahl's law is by and large the key mathematical determinant of how much speed up we tend to get if we have P processors and a program where we have a parallel section and a sequential section. So for P processors, the time that the parallel section actually requires is like this. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. It's not the time that the parallel section requires. It is the time that the parallel execution requires, or the execution in parallel mode requires. It is a time required by the overall sequential execution. So the sequential execution can be broken down into two parts. One is fsec, the sequential part of the execution, and the other is the parallel part of the execution, which is the 1 minus fsec times the baseline, which is the sequential execution time. So when I have P processors, what I'm in a sense speeding up is I'm speeding up the parallel part. So I make a rather idealistic assumption over here that if I have p processors, then I'm speeding up the parallel part p times. So this is typically not the case. We typically do not see a linear speed up, but let's assume we do, as in this problem of dividing an array, we actually will. So what we will actually see is that the time required by the parallel section will get divided by p, the number of cores, the number of processing elements. So the parallel time will be given by this equation. So the speed up, which is t sec by t power, will actually be given by this equation, which is 1 by f sequential plus 1 minus f sequential divided by p. So as I increase p, this quantity, the denominator will decrease, so the numerator remains the same and the ratio will increase. So the speed up will increase. But here is the most important part, the crux of the argument, that as p tends to infinity, the speed up will tend to 1 by f sec. So essentially what will happen is that the speed up will saturate. It will asymptotically saturate. So beyond a certain point for a given problem with a given sequential execution part, regardless of the number of cores that we add, the speed up will remain the same. So that is the key message here. So what I am doing here is I'm showing you a graph where the x-axis is the number of processors, all right, and so I'm increasing that from 1 till 200, and the y-axis is the speed up, and the different bars pretty much show the fraction of the sequential part. If the sequential part is 10%, then the speed up does saturate at 10, and that too quite early. So beyond this point, increasing the number of processors has no effect at all. Then I'll show you for 5%, which is the green line. Here also signs of saturation at this point, which is roughly 25 processors. Beyond that, there's no point in investing. The improvement will be slow and gradual. We can maybe take it up till this point, which is maybe like 42, 43 processors, not beyond that. In comparison, if the sequential part is 2%, our ultimate speed up will be large. Okay, so as we have seen, it will tend to 1 by f sec, which is 50. So we can see that up till around 150 odd processors, maybe 200, it is saturating but somewhat gradually, and it will ultimately saturate though, but it is saturating somewhat gradually. So we can, if we invest the money for 150 processors, we will get a good speed up, which is roughly, sorry, the line is not fully straight, which is roughly like this, it's roughly like 37, 38. So the most important point is that the key determinant of the overall speed up is the sequential execution fraction, f sec, and that determines what will be the final speed up even if I have infinite number of processors, and it will saturate in this asymptotic manner, totally determined by this equation, which means that, look, if the problem is such that f sec is high, there is no point in investing a lot of processors. So it shows us the limitation of the parallelism, right? Limitations of the parallelizing activity, and it also shows us the amount of saturation that can happen. So when you are considering large 1000 core or 10,000 core nodes, so this is, by the way, hold for both shared memory as well as message passing. So when I'm considering large supercomputers, the problems that need to run on them, they need to have extremely small sequential execution parts, because otherwise if you don't have that, Amdahl's law will dictate that we saturate, and that too we saturate soon. Next, I will describe the Gustafson-Barset's law. So this remedies a crucial flaw, or a rather shortcoming, of Amdahl's law. So Amdahl's law had an assumption that the amount of work, the problem that we solve, let's say when we have 10,000 cores, remains the same. That will not be the case, right? Say the old workload is W, right? Let's measure it in terms of time. Then the new workload, right? So we can measure it in terms of time, instructions, doesn't matter. The units are not important. But the new workload, if let's say we have P processors, it needs to be much larger, right? It cannot be the same. If I have 10,000 processors, I cannot be solving the same problem. I need to be solving a bigger problem. Because let's think about it, on a smaller machine like a laptop, we solve a small problem, let's say like doing our assignments. But on a bigger supercomputer, we try to predict climate change. So we scale the parallel part by the number of processors, which is P. So the new workload, again with arbitrary units, is equal to fsec into W, which is the sequential part. This 1 minus fsec times W used to be the erstwhile parallel part, but it is being scaled with the number of multiplied with the number of processors P, right? So the parallel part is being scaled by a factor of P. So this becomes the new workload. All right. So if this is a new workload, let's say that this is linearly dependent on the time, and the time sequential time can be, since linearly dependent, we'll have a constant of proportionality, let it be alpha. So then we can have alpha times W nu is equal to alpha times this entire expression, and the parallel time over here, right? So this is the new workload, in the sense is a new workload for the sequential time, and the parallel time, or the time when we parallelize, will essentially be the new workload which is running on P parallel processors. So similar to Amdahl's law, this factor over here, right, will get divided by P. So what will pretty much happen is P and P here will cancel. Fsec W and Fsec W over here will cancel. So pretty much the parallel time will just be alpha times W. So what I'm doing is, so the parallel time is the time required, is the time required while running on P processors. Okay. And the sequential time is the time required while running on one processor. Of course, we are not running the old workload, instead we are running the new workload. And the new workload is essentially the old sequential part plus the old parallel part multiplied with a factor of P. So the new workload, if measured in terms of time, is alpha times W nu, which is alpha times this expression, right? So I am deleting this divided by P over here, something that I had added. All right. So this is the new workload, and this is essentially the time required if I have a single core. But the thing is that I don't have a single core. If I have P processors, then what I can do is I will divide the parallel part, not the sequential part, just the parallel part, because the parallel part will be sped up. So I'll divide that by a factor of P, and then you will see my terms will nicely cancel out, and the time remaining will be alpha times W. So if I divide the sequential time with the parallel time, alpha will cancel out. What I'm left with is this expression. I'll clean it up, I'll take W out. So the final speed up with the scaled workload, mind you, is fsec plus 1 minus fsec times P, where P is the number of processors. Alright. So there are several interesting firsts over here. So the key point is, for a large P, pretty much what you are seeing is that the small fsec over here will stop being a factor. So the speed up will pretty much become proportional to P. So let me see if I have a graph after this. Oh, sorry, I don't. But the thing is, this thing can be very nicely graphed. So what you will see is that the speed up will become proportional to the number of processors, which is a good thing. And but of course the slope will be decided by 1 minus fsec. So fsec in this case, instead of being a limiter the way it was when we were dealing with Amdahl's law, the the fraction fsec over here is just deciding the slope, which is also important. It is essentially telling us that if, let's say, I double the number of processors, what is it that I get, and that will be decided by the slope, right? But the key factor over here is that the net speed up we will get when the workload is scaled is pretty much proportional to the number of processors. So this is the advantage of the Gustafson-Barsis's law, that it is actually Amdahl's law plus plus in a certain sense, that it scales the workload, right? So that's the most important point over here. Let's keep going. So let us discuss the design space of multiprocessors, the Flynn's classification. So here we will look at the entire design space of the multiprocessing world, right? We will start with a conventional uniprocessor. So a conventional uniprocessor, which is a single core, is there in the design space. So where we pretty much have it's called an SISD multiprocessor, where we have a single instruction stream, a single program basically, which supplies the instructions, and essentially single data stream, a single memory which supplies the data. All right, so we have seen that. Then we will have SIMD. So SIMD is something that was used in the good old days in vector processors. So what SIMD is, it's a single instruction but multiple data. So what that basically does is that we can, let's say, take 4 integers x, y, z and u. So these 4 integers, maybe they're 32 bits each. So we'll pack them into what is called a vector register. Each register is 128 bits. We can have 4 more variables, x dash, y dash, z dash and u dash. Again, we'll pack them into a 128-bit vector register. So we need to define a vector register file as well. And when we add the 2 vector registers, we'll get a final outcome. So the final outcome, so this entire addition, adding 4 numbers, will be treated still as a single instruction, where we'll add 2 vector registers, the output is a vector. So one instruction is adding 4 pairs of numbers, but the result is x plus x dash over here. Over here we'll have y plus y dash. Over here we'll have z plus z dash. And over here we'll have u plus u dash. Alright. So we perform pairwise additions of numbers, but we perform 4 pairs using a single instruction. So we have a single instruction but multiple data. See, multiple data x, y, z and u, multiple data but single instruction. Then